Welcome to this explainer on the anatomy of an ancient community. Today we're diving into a really deep, scholarly study of the sociology behind the early Christian movement. And look, we're not just blowing the dust off some ancient historical artifacts here. We're actually analyzing these texts as a literal blueprint for a highly interdependent social framework. By closely examining the famous one another commands scattered all throughout the New Testament, we're going to uncover exactly how this new covenant community was designed to fully function as the family of God. We're going to break down how they supported each other, how they maintained their social cohesion, and the incredibly intricate protocols they used to deal with their internal problems.
Okay, let's dive right into this. To really grasp what's going on, we first need to define the primary metaphor that's going to act as our sociological lens for this entire analysis. According to the Apostle Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, specifically chapter 12, verse 25, this community is definitively called a body. The text explicitly states that the ultimate goal is that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. Now, you have to understand, this isn't just a nice poetic image, it's a strict structural mandate. It describes a totally unified, interdependent collective where wildly diverse individual parts are bound tightly together. The survival of the whole organism literally depends on this active, equal concern.
So how did this body actually function? Well, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the ethos of mutual love. Second, humility and submitting downward. Third, edification and active support. Fourth, conflict resolution and forgiveness. And finally, functioning as one body. All right, let's jump straight into section 1, the ethos of mutual love.
If you actually run the numbers and analyze the frequency of the commands across all of our source texts, one mandate just completely towers over the rest. Love one another. I mean, it's repeated exhaustively. It shows up 3 times in John 13 alone, again in John 15, and all over the letters of John, Romans, Thessalonians, and Peter. This sheer repetition tells us that love was absolutely the foundational pillar of their entire social framework. According to the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verse 35, this love was positioned as way more than just a warm internal emotion. It was actually the primary public identifier of membership in this group. The text says, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." Think about it. In a world that was fiercely categorized by extreme social, economic, and ethnic divisions, this new covenant community wore mutual love like a visible uniform. It was the absolute glue of their social cohesion, broadcasting to the outside world that a completely new type of community had arrived.
And this love was intensely familial. According to Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 12, verse 10, the command is to be devoted to one another in brotherly love. This is a massive sociological shift. They were taking totally disparate individuals, people who are not biologically related and came from vastly different social classes, and dropping them into a rigid, unified family structure. They were radically redefining what kinship even meant.
Which naturally brings us to our second structural pillar, humility and submitting downward.
Now, what's really interesting about this concept is how you manage to put such vastly different people into one new family without the whole thing just exploding. The ancient Greco-Roman world was entirely built on strict, rigid hierarchies of dominance, but this community, they flipped that completely upside down. If we look at Romans chapter 12, verse 10, the command is to honor one another above yourselves. And then over in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, the mandate is, in humility, value others above yourselves. This introduces a truly radical sociological concept, downward mobility. Instead of constantly trying to climb the social ladder and crush the competition, members of this community were mandated to actively lower themselves and elevate their peers. It was a total dismantling of the ego-driven, status-seeking culture that surrounded them.
We actually see the ultimate expression of this in the letter to the Ephesians. According to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, the community is commanded to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. This definitely warrants a closer look because it's arguably the most radical social mechanism in the entire text. Mutual submission acts as this genius protective mechanism against power imbalances and abuse. You see, in most societies, submission is strictly a one-way street. The lesser submits to the greater. But by adding those 3 little words to one another, the text creates a flat, decentralized network of mutual deference. Every single member is placing the needs, perspectives, and well-being of the other members before their own. But here is the most crucial part. You have to look at the motivation provided in the text. They are doing this out of reverence for Christ. This mutual submission isn't rooted in some generic secular social contract. It is deeply tied to their new covenant theology. Their submission to one another is framed as a direct reflection of their reverence for the divine, and that totally infuses their everyday interpersonal dynamics with an ultimate sacred significance.
Okay, let's move into our third section,
edification, and active support.
Now that we've established the foundation of mutual love and downward submission, we have to look at the active, practical things this group actually did. And honestly, these practices read a lot like the operating manual for a modern, high-performance support team. But remember, this framework is 2,000 years old. First, according to Romans 15 and Colossians 3, they were to instruct and admonish one another. That's pure peer-to-peer education and accountability. Second, according to Ephesians 5, they communicated through psalms and songs, literally weaving art and theology into their daily interactions. Third, according to Hebrews 3, they provided daily encouragement. Fourth, according to Galatians 6, verse 2, they were told to carry each other's burdens. This functioned as an ancient social safety net. If a member suffered economically, physically, or emotionally, the entire community absorbed the weight of that crisis. Finally, according to 1 Peter 4, they offered hospitality without grumbling, opening up their homes and sharing resources. Put it all together and you have an exhaustive 360-degree system of mutual care.
I want to zero in on the timing of this support, though. According to the book of Hebrews, chapter 3, verse 13, the author writes, "But encourage one another daily, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness." Notice the vital urgency there. Daily intervention was required. The sociological insight here is profound. Alienation and hardening don't happen overnight, they happen gradually. By mandating a strict rhythm of daily, positive reinforcement, the community actively prevented its members from drifting into isolation.
So the crucial point is this entire support system absolutely relied on one specific mandate. According to 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. This explicitly requires that every single member contributes. There are no passive consumers in this model. Everyone brings a unique resource or talent to the table, and they are required to deploy it for the survival and flourishing of the whole collective.
But hold on a second. This raises a really practical question. When you force incredibly diverse people to share their lives, their resources, and their daily struggles, friction is absolutely inevitable, right? So how exactly did this ancient community prevent their diverse body from just completely fracturing under the intense internal pressure of close proximity?
And that brings us to Section 4, Conflict Resolution and Forgiveness. This group possessed incredibly sophisticated, built-in fail-safe protocols to handle interpersonal damage. For a diverse, interdependent collective to survive long-term, they had to know exactly what to do when things went wrong. And the sources provide a really stark contrast between destructive behaviors and mandated protocols. On the one hand, we see absolute prohibitions. According to Galatians chapter 5, verse 15, they are warned, "If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other." Similarly, according to James chapter 4, they are bluntly told, "Do not slander one another." They clearly recognize that toxic communication would literally cannibalize the community from the inside out. On the other hand, we see the mandates. According to Colossians chapter 3 and Ephesians chapter 4, the explicit command is to bear with one another in love and forgive one another, specifically being kind and compassionate. Forgiveness wasn't just some polite suggestion. It was a mandatory structural component specifically designed to halt the cycle of retribution in its tracks.
For really serious infractions, they utilized a highly structured legal and social mechanism. According to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verses 15 through 17, there is a strict three-step procedural model. Step 1 is absolute privacy. Go and point out their fault just between the two of you. The goal here is immediate de-escalation, trying to win the person over without any public shaming. If that doesn't work, step 2 introduces mediation. Take one or two others along so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. This brilliantly prevents a messy, he said, she said stalemate by bringing in objective community members to mediate the reality of the situation. Only if mediation completely fails do we reach step 3. Tell it to the congregation. It gets escalated to the broader assembly. And if the individual refuses to listen to the entire community, only then are they removed. The absolute brilliance of this sociological protocol is that every step is entirely designed to salvage relationships rather than immediately severing them.
All right, let's move into our final section, functioning as one body.
And this brilliantly illustrates what it actually looked like when this community gathered together.
How did all these commands, the love, the submission, the conflict resolution, the daily encouragement, actually synthesize into a real-life corporate reality? According to 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 26, Paul writes, "When you come together, each of you has a hymn, or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Everything must be done so that the assembly may be built up." This describes an incredibly decentralized, highly participatory network. When they gathered, which was often around a shared meal known as the love feast, an event that was deeply tied to their actual membership in the body, there wasn't just one guy talking while everyone else passively listened. Every single member brought something to the table to build up the assembly.
Furthermore, according to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 19, they were to speak to one another with psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit. It is critical to note here how they viewed themselves as inextricably connected by the Holy Spirit. The Spirit of love was like the unseen nervous system connecting the various members of this body. Through shared art, deeply held theology, and mutual spiritual communication, they essentially wove their individual lives into a single, cohesive organism.
Bringing our academic analysis full circle, we return to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 25. The ultimate design of all of this was that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. This equal concern, which we've seen manifested through brotherly love, mutual downward submission, carrying each other's burdens, and structured forgiveness, was the exact methodology used to maintain the structural integrity of the community against all odds.
We've thoroughly dissected the sociology of these ancient texts today, and we've uncovered a truly robust blueprint for a fully interdependent family. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this to ponder. If our modern communities, our teams, or even just our friend groups adopted this rigorous framework, practicing true downward mobility, radical mutual submission, daily encouragement, and strict protocols for forgiveness, how radically different would our societies look today?